When the phone rang that morning, I thought it was my younger son just saying hello from the airport, the way he always did between clouds and continents. I had warm water on my hands and soap on my wrists, because after breakfast the dishes don't wash themselves, and in our house, peace always began with a clean sink. Upstairs, the shower hissed steadily. "Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower," my daughter-in-law had called moments earlier, her voice drifting down the stairs like steam. I dried my hands on the apron my late husband used to tease me about. "You and your floral armor, Stella," and answered the landline with a smile already forming. "Hi, Mom," my son said, all sunshine and engine hum. But then the sunlight in his voice dimmed. "Something strange is happening. My sister-in-law is at the house, right?" I looked up at the ceiling, where water still whispered behind tile. "Yes," I said easily. "She's in the shower." He lowered his voice. "That's impossible. I'm holding her passport, and she just boarded my flight to France." The world didn't shatter. It tilted. A few degrees at first, just enough for the floor to feel unfamiliar, for the air to thin. I pressed the receiver harder to my ear as if I could wring a better answer out of it. The shower cut off. Footsteps moved across the bedroom above me. Two women with one face, I thought. One upstairs, one on a plane. I've learned that truth rarely arrives as a scream. It comes as a whisper, asking if you're brave enough to listen. If you are listening now, if your breath caught like mine did that morning, stay with me. This is how a quiet home, a set dinner table, and a grandmother's steady hands learned that love needs courage the way lungs need air. The day had begun like 100 others. Stephen, my eldest, left early, a coffee kiss on Matthew's hair before the school bus swallowed my grandson's laughter. I stacked plates that smelled faintly of cumin from last night's beans and wiped crumbs that glittered in the sunbeam crossing our kitchen table. Araceli, Stephen's wife, leaned over the railing with that soft voice of hers. "Mom, shower." 5 minutes. I waved my dish rag like a flag of truce. "I'll try not to run the washing machine," I teased. Her giggle fell like coins, small and bright. Then Ivan called. "Mom," he said after our usual check-in about the weather over Phoenix and the winds over Paris. "I found a passport by the gate. It's hers." I checked. And I walked through the cabin to see she's in first class, sitting beside a man who looks like he owns the sky. In the living room, the wall photos watched me. The wedding portrait where Araceli's veil stole the afternoon. The one where Stephen looked as if he'd invented the word proud. Baby Matthew with milk on his tongue. Ivan in his pilot uniform the first day he truly believed the boy in his bedroom posters was now the man in his mirror. I clung to the faces I had known against a voice telling me they might be strangers. "Are you sure?" I whispered, as much to the photos as to my son. "Are you sure, honey?" "I'm looking at her, Mom." Silence has a weight when you're holding a phone to your cheek. It presses into your bones. I felt the house listening with me. The old air vent that ticks when it wants attention. The front gate that sighs like an elderly neighbor settling back into her chair. Overhead, the floorboards creaked with wet feet crossing from bathroom to closet, the universal language of a woman deciding between a blue dress and a white blouse. Araceli's voice floated down. "Mom, who is it?" I pressed my palm over the mouthpiece so hard my heartbeat thudded in my own hand. "A friend," I called back, and my voice cracked on the lie. I stepped into the living room to hide the panic in my eyes. "Ivan," I breathed into the receiver. "She's here." "I hear her. She's..." drying her hair. A ridiculous detail to offer a pilot holding a passport. "Mom," he said, steady but stunned. "I'm telling you, the sky I'm flying through is holding your daughter-in-law. She's not upstairs. We are not built for two realities at once." My knees softened. The couch caught me. I hung up because there was nothing left in the call but my own breathing. And I didn't want my son to hear me try to swallow a storm. Araceli descended the stairs with damp hair and the clean smell of soap that always made me think of fresh sheets and ordinary joys. She wore a pale dress, blue as morning. "Mom," she said with a smile, as if nothing had ever been simpler than this day. "I'm going to the market. Anything you need?" "Tomatoes," I thought. Answers. Tomatoes, I said. My voice a shade too thin. She lifted the wicker basket I'd bought at the county fair 2 summers ago, the one she always used, and kissed the air near my cheek. Back soon! The front gate clicked shut. The house exhaled. I don't know if other mothers will understand. There is a point when your heartbeat stops sounding like fear and starts sounding like resolve. Mine changed somewhere between the kitchen and the old armchair where I keep my knitting. I pulled out the notebook I'd used for grocery lists and mending reminders, and I wrote, in the careful hand my own mother taught me, 3 Bos p.m. Araceli leaves for the market. Blue dress. Basket, wicker. Voice, light. And then, smaller. Ivan says, passport. Plane, first class. Man. Writing made what I was afraid to feel become something I could face. The sun stretched across the tile in slow gold ladders. Matthew tumbled in at 4 with crayons and victories. Grandma, my teacher said my owl looks like a real owl, he chirped, breathless joy in a boy's lungs. I wanted to live in his world for the length of one inhale. I bet it's the wisest owl in all of Phoenix, I told him, and he grinned with the certainty of boys who believe their grandmother's magic. He turned his notebook so I could see 2 pages. Look, Mom helped me yesterday. 1 page bore neat right-handed letters, straight rows like well-behaved soldiers. But today she wrote with her other hand, and it looks funny. The 2nd page looped and leaned, left-handed letters slanting as if a breeze had pushed them. She's silly, he giggled. My throat tightened. She must have been tired today, I lied gently, because children deserve explanations that do not frighten the dark out of them. He accepted it the way 7-year-olds accept rain, as a fact that will pass. Mrs. Collins arrived with a plate we'd sent over. Your daughter-in-law is so sweet, dear, she said, patting my arm. Yesterday she handed me this with her left hand, though. Didn't you tell me she's a righty? She laughed softly. Maybe she's ambidextrous. Imagine the cakes she could decorate. She didn't mean harm, but the air in my chest grew crowded with details I could no longer dismiss as quirks. At 6, the front gate clicked again. Araceli came in with a different blouse than the dress she'd left in. The basket dyed a different blue than wicker has a right to be. I stained it, she said, breezing past my question, as if her voice could iron wrinkles out of reality. At dinner, she reminded Stephen of a parent-teacher conference in a tone that was almost tender. 3 nights later, she scolded Matthew for knocking over a glass with a sharpness that left bite marks on silence. He's 7, Stephen said, quiet but firm, a man trying to protect 2 fragile worlds at once, his wife's pride and his son's heart. She bristled. You always make me the villain. The room shrank. Matthew sunk into his chair and I reached for him under the table, a secret lifeline of fingertips. Every family has a seam you don't see until someone pulls it. I began to live by ink. Left hand, right hand, sweet, sour, white blouse, navy blouse. Notes filled my notebook like footfalls in snow, proof of where I'd been, proof I wasn't imagining the cold. The market saw her. The bakery saw her. The alley behind the working-class row houses saw her too. One blistered afternoon when she turned left instead of right and slid into a door like a shadow slipping into itself. I followed far enough to feel the decision scrape me. Knock or retreat. I retreated. When I reached my kitchen by a path my feet no longer trusted, Araceli, no, a woman with Araceli's face, stood at the counter chopping cilantro, a white blouse spotless as denial. Where did you go, Mom? You're late. Her eyes were not the eyes that had giggled on the stair that morning. They were colder, sharper. I thought of knives and twins and how a mirror pretends it's only glass. That night I couldn't sleep. I think grief and truth share a bed. They toss and pull and won't let you rest. I lay staring at the ceiling where the paint peels a little by the old vent, and I wrote a sentence so quiet it felt like a sin. Maybe they are not the same person. Morning brought courage in the shape of an old photo frame and a kind of prayer. I tucked our family picture, Stephen and Araceli and Matthew on a bright day when the grass looked like a promise, under my arm. wrapped my shawl around my shoulders as if faith had sleeves, and walked back to the alley. There is a particular silence in places that hold secrets. Dust hung in the light like the thinnest lace. A woman at a corn stand fanned charcoal and recognized the face in my frame. "Number 14, she said, nodding with the dignity of people who know more than they say, but less than they carry. I knocked. The door opened. My face stared back at me on a woman who was not mine. Everything narrowed. The doorway, my breath, the space between heartbeat and revelation. She tried to close the door, but another voice, soft, steady, spoke from within. "Isadora, don't hide. Not today." Inside, the room smelled like bleach and worry. An old man coughed on a narrow cot. The woman, this mirror of my daughter-in-law, stood wringing a rag as if apology were water she could squeeze out onto the floorboards. A second woman, neat bun and watchful eyes, gestured to a chair. "I'm Lucy," she said. "This is Isadora. Please sit." The chair was hard wood. It felt right for truth. I placed the photo frame on my lap, a relic on a small altar. "Tell me," I asked, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness, "why you have my daughter-in-law's face and my grandson's lullabies embedded in your hands." Isadora's name trembled out of her like a confession. Lucy's words followed with the calm of someone who has already walked through fire. Poverty. Medicine. A chance meeting in a market where two women realized they could trade more than recipes. A proposition, a payment, a role replace her, for hours at a time, in a home that had trusted one name and been visited by another. The puzzle I'd been afraid to assemble clicked into its own ugly clarity. Right hand, left hand, sugar, salt, lullaby one night, frost the next. The world did not end. It rearranged itself to fit a truth it had been refusing like a stubborn drawer. Then Lucy said a name that made the room tilt again. Charles Thompson. A man elegant enough to make first class feel small. Honey whispered over coffee, not for sweetness but secrecy. I knocked over the glass near my elbow. The water ran across the table and dripped in a rhythm like a clock that had stopped pretending time was gentle. "Why?" I asked Isadora, and I didn't mean the money. She wept for the only answer she owned: survival. For a father coughing on a cot and a mother whose hands had learned the language of worry longer than they'd known the grammar of rest. "I don't blame you," I said, surprised to find it true. Anger stood in the corner like an impatient aunt, loud and right in some ways, but pity and resolve took the chairs beside me. "But I need the truth." Truth turned out to be older than the alley. Older than Stephen's vows, older even than the floral apron that had tied my mornings into neat bows. It was a hospital years ago, a nurse with a heart too large for her small salary, a poor mother holding two babies and being asked by the world to choose which struggle she could afford. Twins divided by necessity and stitched to different destinies by a woman who could not bear to watch a child be abandoned. Isadora's birthday matched. Araceli's with the precision of the seam I hadn't seen. The papers trembled in my hands. "You are sisters," I said. And the floor stopped tilting because sometimes truth, once spoken, is heavier than doubt and has the kindness to let you stand. Lucy rested a hand on Isadora's back while she cried into her palms for what could have been and what had been used against her. I stood. I felt very old and very certain at once, like my mother the day she told me I had to stop smoothing every ripple in other people's lives, because some waves arrived to teach shorelines how to be strong. "No more," I said. "No one uses you again, and no one uses my family again. We bring this into the light." When I stepped out of number 14, Phoenix burned as if the sun had sworn a private vendetta. But a breeze threaded through my shawl and I recognized it. The same breeze that moves a curtain when a window is cracked after a storm. Air. I could breathe. That night, I set a table the way soldiers polish their boots before they walk into the unknown. Everything in its place, grease and grief wiped off the silver. I cooked Stephen's favorites because familiar flavors steady shaking hands. I lit candles because truth doesn't mind being seen. When Stephen came home, he smiled at the spread and asked what we were celebrating. "Us," I said. He kissed my cheek with a gratitude that made my eyes burn. Araceli floated in on a cloud of perfume and nerves. Matthew ran circles around our island of plates. A small comet of joy reminding us that before and after are words adults use to make sense of the disasters they schedule for themselves. I told Yvonne to come by after his shift. I told him to bring the papers that had made him whisper on an international jet. And I asked Isadora to dress as herself, a woman without anyone else's name stuck to her skin. By the time the doorbell rang and my two girls, one by law, one by revelation, stood in the same room, the candles had burned to soft bowls of light. The air had that fragile hush that precedes a summer monsoon. Somewhere on our street a dog barked, then thought better of it. "Why are there two moms?" Matthew asked, puzzled and sweet. And in a single sentence, my grandson named the storm. If your family table suddenly held two versions of the same truth, what would you do? Protect the calm or pursue the clarity that might break it? Tell me in the comments what your heart says right now, before you know what happens next. And if stories like this help you feel less alone, subscribe. The next chapter begins with a door closing and a life opening. Every story has a moment where doubt stops being a whisper and becomes a voice you can't ignore. For me, it was when I opened my old spiral notebook, the one meant for grocery lists and birthday reminders, and began writing secrets I never thought I'd keep. Left hand. Right hand. Sweet one day, bitter the next. White blouse, navy blouse. Same woman, but never the same. I had always trusted my memory, but memories bend under pressure. Ink does not. And with every line I wrote, I knew this was no longer just a mother's imagination. This was a mystery unraveling in my own home. If you've ever had that uneasy feeling, that something doesn't quite add up, even though everyone insists it's fine, you'll understand what I'm about to share. After that first terrifying day, I started to notice details I used to overlook. It was as if my house had been speaking to me for years, and only now had I learned the language. The way Araceli brushed Matthew's hair, always with her right hand. Except on Thursdays, when suddenly she parted it with her left, the way she sang. On some nights, her voice wrapped Matthew in tenderness, humming the old lullaby Cielito Lindo, a song only she and I knew in this house. On others, she closed his door without a word, leaving silence so heavy I could hear my grandson turn restlessly in his bed. The neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Collins, polite as ever, had tilted her head one evening. "Your daughter-in-law is lovely, Stella, but sometimes she doesn't even recognize me on the street." Mr. Johnson at the bakery said something similar. Yesterday she praised my bread like it was the best she'd ever tasted. This morning, she bought the same loaf with a frown, didn't say a word, and left. I smiled at them. I defended her. But when the door closed, their words stabbed into me like pins holding together a dress I never asked to wear. Children see truths, adults excuse. Matthew, with his crayons and homework pages, became my unwilling messenger. "Grandma," he said one afternoon, "yesterday Mom helped me write, and her letters were straight and pretty. Today she told me to do it myself. She didn't even look at me." His little eyes searched mine, not for answers, but for comfort. I hugged him tightly, promising without words that at least I would never change faces on him, but inside my stomach twisted. A mother's love should be steady as the sun, not flicker on and off like a faulty bulb. The suspicion grew roots. One Saturday, when Stephen left for work and Matthew was at school, I finally did what my conscience had resisted. I followed her. She left in her usual floral dress, carrying the wicker basket, and told me with that familiar smile, "Back from the market soon, Mom." But instead of turning toward the market, she took the alley. Her pace quickened. My heart hammered as I stayed several steps behind, hidden beneath my old shawl. Number 14. A peeling door, a wilted daisy in a chipped pot. She knocked, slipped inside, and vanished. I stood there frozen, torn between knocking myself and running home. In the end, I fled. But when I returned, breathless, there she was, already in my kitchen, chopping cilantro, wearing a completely different blouse than she'd left in. How did you get back so fast? I asked, masking the terror in my chest. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as glass. Where did you go, Mom? You're late. That night, I couldn't sleep. My pen pressed harder against paper as I wrote, 3 p.m., leaves and floral dress. Basket wicker. Enters alley. 3:15 p.m. at home again, white blouse. Impossible. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I wrote another line, one that shook me even as I formed the letters. Maybe she is not who she says she is. The next day, courage carried me back to number 14. This time I knocked. And when the door opened, I saw her again, or at least her face. But this woman's eyes were softer, trembling with shame. She clutched a rag in her hands like a lifeline. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm not Araceli. My name is Isadora. Lucy, her roommate, stepped in, explaining what I could hardly process. Isadora was poor, desperate, and identical to my daughter-in-law. Araceli had discovered her and offered money for her to fill in when needed. A twin in service of convenience. Everything clicked. The changing hands. The shifting moods. The inconsistencies neighbors had noticed but couldn't name, and then came the blow that made my knees tremble. Lucy revealed more. I once heard Araceli with a man. Charles Thompson. Rich. Elegant. She called him Honey. Ivan's voice echoed in my mind. She's sitting in first class beside a man who looks very rich. Like they're a couple. My notebook had led me here. To the truth. To the twin. To betrayal. If you were in my place, standing in that alley with proof that your own family had been deceived, would you confront her immediately, or gather more evidence first? Tell me what your instinct says, because in the next part, the confrontation will happen, and once words are spoken, there's no way back. Make sure you're subscribed, because the storm is only beginning. They say the hardest part of the truth isn't hearing it, it's believing it. I had spent weeks trapped between two realities, my heart pounding every time Araceli smiled as though nothing was wrong, while Ivan's words from the sky replayed in my ears. But when I stepped into that cramped little house in the alley, I knew I could never unsee what I saw. Two faces, one life built on lies, and a secret that would tear my family in two. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal felt like it was happening in your own chest, then you'll understand the weight of what came next. The room smelled faintly of bleach and sickness. An old man coughed weakly on a cot in the corner, his chest rattling with each breath. Beside me, Lucy, calm, clear-eyed, motioned toward the trembling young woman clutching a rag. This is Isadora, she said softly. She isn't your daughter-in-law, she only pretends to be. The girl looked up and my heart stuttered. She had Araceli's face, down to the curve of her jaw and the long black hair falling across her shoulders, but her eyes held only guilt, not calculation. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to buy medicine for my parents. I gripped the photo frame I'd brought from home, Stephen and Araceli smiling with Matthew between them, and placed it on my lap like evidence. My voice trembled. Why would she ask you to live in my house? To tuck my grandson into bed? To look at me with her face? Isadora's tears fell like confession. She paid me. She told me just to act normal, to cook sometimes, to go to the market, to be her for a while. I didn't ask questions. I couldn't. We needed the money. Lucy leaned forward. Her voice was steady, but her words were knives. I once saw your daughter-in-law with a man, Charles Thompson. Very wealthy. They called each other Honey. That's when Isadora was covering for her. My stomach dropped. Ivan's whisper from the plane burned in my ears. She's sitting beside a rich man like they're a couple. The puzzle was no longer pieces. It was a picture, and it made me sick. I wasn't done searching. Something deeper tugged at me. When I returned the next morning, Isadora's adoptive mother, a frail old woman with white hair and trembling hands, told me a story that broke my world even further. Years ago, she said weakly, I worked at a small hospital. A poor family had twins. They couldn't afford both. One was to be abandoned. I couldn't let that happen. I took the baby. I raised her as my own. That's Isadora. The papers confirmed it. Birth dates identical. Details too precise to be coincidence, Araceli and Isadora weren't just lookalikes. They were sisters. Twins divided at birth, one raised in comfort, the other in poverty. I walked home in a haze. I thought of every meal, every lullaby, every moment I had believed Araceli's smile was sincere. How many of those were hers, and how many belonged to the sister she had exploited? That night I looked at my notebook, now heavy with inked suspicions, and wrote the only sentence that gave me strength. Tomorrow, this ends. I called Ivan. Bring her passport, I told him. And come home. Then I called Isadora. You must come too. My son deserves to see the truth with his own eyes. Imagine discovering that the woman tearing your family apart wasn't just lying. She was using her own twin sister as a pawn. Would you confront her at the dinner table, in front of everyone, or pull her aside in secret? Let me know in the comments. Because in part 4, the dinner table becomes a courtroom, and the verdict will change everything. Stay tuned. The confrontation is next. Not all battles are fought on battlefields. Some are fought at dinner tables, between the smell of roasted fish, the glow of candles, and the silence of a family holding its breath. That night, my dining room was no longer a home. It was a courtroom. The witnesses were my sons, my grandson, and the woman who had lived in our house under two faces. The evidence, a passport, a notebook of doubt, and a sister who had been living in the shadows. And the truth, sharp, undeniable, was finally ready to be spoken. I cooked the chili Stephen loved, roasted the fish Matthew always begged for, and laid out the white tablecloth I had been saving. But my hands shook so hard on the knife that I nicked my finger, and a drop of blood fell onto the tomatoes. I whispered to myself, "This is the last meal in lies." Stephen came home, tired but smiling at the sight. "What are we celebrating, Mom?" "Us," I said simply, though my voice carried a weight he didn't yet understand. Araceli arrived moments later, her perfume lingering in the air, her smile too practiced. Matthew ran to me, laughing. I hugged him longer than usual. I needed his warmth as armor. When the candles flickered low, I nodded toward the door. Ivan stepped in. Behind him, Isadora, two women. "On face." The room froze. Matthew gasped. "Why are there two moms?" His words, innocent and cutting, shattered the silence. Araceli shot to her feet, her eyes blazing. "What is this?" she demanded. I stood, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Sit down, Araceli," I said firmly. "This ends tonight." I turned to Stephen, my eldest, my boy who had trusted too much. My voice trembled but did not break. "Ivan saw her on a flight to France, Stephen. At the same time she was in this house. He held her passport in his hands. And this," I gestured to Isadora, standing pale and shaking, "this is her twin. Her sister. The one she has used to deceive us all." Stephen's spoon clattered onto his plate. "Twins?" he whispered, disbelief clouding his face. Isadora stepped forward, tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I only did what she asked, because my family was sick and she paid me." Ivan laid the passport on the table with a heavy thud. "Here's proof. The stamps don't lie." Araceli's face drained of color. She laughed bitterly, a sharp sound. "Lies, all lies. You're trying to humiliate me." Lucy entered then, her voice calm but cutting. "I saw you with Charles Thompson. I heard you call him honey, and while you were with him, Isadora was in this house pretending to be you." The room erupted with silence heavier than shouting. Stephen's face turned pale, then red. He looked at his wife with eyes full of betrayal. "Tell me it isn't true," he begged. "Tell me you didn't do this to us." For a moment, she stayed silent. Then, like a dam bursting, her words poured out, sharp, cruel, irreversible. "Yes, it's true. I have a lover. I'm tired of this poor life. Charles gives me what you never could. And you, Stephen, you're nothing compared to him." The words struck like bullets. Matthew burst into tears, clinging to me. "Grandma, what did Mommy say?" His little body shook, and I wrapped my arms around him. my own tears falling into his hair. Stephen rose from his chair, his fists clenched, his voice trembling. After everything, after all we built, you throw it away for this? Araceli sneered. I deserve better. Then she stormed out, the door slamming like a verdict. The house was silent except for Matthew's sobs. Stephen sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. Ivan stood frozen, grief tightening his jaw. And Isadora, poor Isadora, looked at the floor, her tears falling quietly, as if she were mourning not only her sister's choices, but the family she herself never had. I took a deep breath. No more lies. No more games. This family will survive without her. We will protect Matthew. We will heal. For the first time in weeks, my words felt steady, because truth, no matter how cruel, is lighter to carry than doubt. If you had been at that table, hearing your daughter-in-law confess she had another life, what would you have done? Would you have begged her to stay for the child's sake? Or let her walk away forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because in Part 5, healing begins, but not in the way anyone expected. When a storm tears through a home, it doesn't only break walls, it breaks hearts. After that night at the dinner table, our house was no longer the same. Laughter had drained from the rooms, and silence pressed against the windows like heavy rain. Araceli was gone. She left with her pride and her lover without looking back, without fighting for her son. But sometimes when life strips away the false, it leaves space for the true to step forward. And in the ashes of betrayal, a new beginning was waiting, one none of us could have predicted. The next morning, Stephen sat at the kitchen table staring at his untouched coffee. His eyes looked hollow, as though he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mom," he said quietly. She didn't even ask about Matthew. She just signed the divorce papers and walked away. I placed my hand over his, wishing I could pour strength into his veins. "She chose her path, son. But you and Matthew, you still have a future. And I will never let either of you walk it alone." Matthew, innocent and small, asked the only question that broke me. "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy love me anymore?" I hugged him, my tears soaking into his hair. "She loves you, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups forget how. I promise, you'll never be without love." In the weeks that followed, the emptiness in our house was slowly filled by someone unexpected, Isadora. At first, she came shyly, bringing warm food in little containers, helping Matthew with homework, sitting with Stephen when he drowned in silence. She had the same face as Araceli, but a different soul. Where Araceli had been sharp, Isadora was gentle. Where Araceli had deceived, Isadora was honest. One afternoon, I overheard Matthew giggling. "Mom, Isadora, draw me a bird," he said, stumbling over the name but smiling so brightly it made my chest ache. She laughed softly and leaned down. "Only if you promise to color it beautifully." I stood in the doorway, unseen, tears streaming down my cheeks. My grandson had found comfort again, not in the mother who abandoned him, but in the sister who never meant to stay. Stephen, too, began to find life again. At first, he kept his distance, polite but guarded. But grief makes people notice who stays when the crowd leaves. Isadora stayed. She helped with Matthew's lunches, folded laundry with me, and even listened when Stephen spoke about his architecture projects. Her eyes glowed with pride each time he showed her a sketch. One evening, Stephen called me into the living room. His hands trembled as he held a small ring. Isadora sat beside him, her face flushed with confusion. "Mom," Stephen said, his voice breaking, "I thought love had left me. But she brought light back to this home. Would it be wrong to give Matthew a new mother and me another chance?" I looked at Isadora, this girl who had once been used as a pawn, and saw tears shining in her eyes. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was offering her heart. I walked over, placed my hands over theirs, and whispered, "It would be wrong not to." Their wedding was small, just family and neighbors in our yard. Roses climbed the fence, and Matthew wore a tiny suit as his father's best man. Ivan flew in from work. his uniform sharp, his smile brighter than I'd seen in months. As Stephen and Isadora exchanged vows, I felt the knot in my chest finally loosen. This was no fairy tale. No one pretended the scars weren't there. But sometimes broken things don't need to be hidden. They can be mended into something stronger. That night, as laughter filled the house again, I sat on the porch, listening to Matthew's giggles and Isadora's lullaby drifting through the window. Cielito lindo. The same song that once marked my doubts now became the anthem of our healing. I looked up at the stars and whispered to Raphael, my late husband, "We survived, love." And the truth, though cruel, gave us a new family. Every betrayal leaves scars, but sometimes it also opens doors to blessings we never imagined. If you were in Stephen's place, would you have been able to trust Isadora, the woman who once lived in the shadow of his wife? Or would the resemblance have been too much to bear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because healing, just like storytelling, is a journey we take together.